8 sentences have been considered by psychologists to probably be the greatest collection of wisdom ever packaged by a single philosopher.
How does a man who built a $60 million empire and counseled presidents end up banned from his own pulpit and begging for food? Robert Schuller didn't just lose his church, he watched as his family turned against each other and his legacy was sold to the highest bidder. What took 50 years to build was lost in only 3 years. But the bankruptcy papers don't tell the full story. What dark secrets were festering behind those 10,000 panes of glass when the cameras finally stopped rolling? The $43 million debt. On a Tuesday in October 2010, headlines went crazy as news outlets announced the Crystal Cathedral was officially filing for bankruptcy. The news came as a shock to everyone, especially because it wasn't just some local chapel in Southern California. It was a massive glass landmark and the headquarters of a global empire that millions of people on the planet tuned into. But when the court papers finally went public, it wasn't what anyone had ever expected. It was revealed that the ministry was drowning in $43 million of debt. Even the list of people they owed money to was quite unusual. It didn't only have names of big banks or massive corporations on the list of creditors. The church also owed millions to small businesses and individuals who had in some way been affiliated with the church's religious activities. It was also rumored that the ministry owed the local florist who provided the beautiful Sunday arrangements and even the vendors who had brought in live animals for their massive holiday pageants. While these small business owners were waiting for their checks, the Schuller family was still living a very comfortable life. Public records showed that family members were pulling in huge salaries all while using tax-exempt housing allowances that saved them a fortune. This created a massive wave of anger in a lot of people, especially those who had lost their jobs during the recession. It felt wrong to many followers who had sent in their hard-earned money to support the mission. Television screens across the country flashed images of the bankruptcy filing alongside shots of the cathedral spire. With no way to pay back the loan and a cloud of uncertainty looming over the ministry, there's only been one question on the minds of everyone. How does a ministry with over 1 million viewers every week suddenly run out of cash? With no one to give an answer to, it left a space for plenty of theories to fly. The truth was much more complicated than a few bad investments. It was a slow collapse that had been building for years behind the scenes. People could not understand how a global star could fall so fast. But when you look closer, the warning signs were there long before the bankruptcy filing ever made headlines. The ministry had expanded rapidly. Massive productions, expensive broadcasts, and a lifestyle that required constant funding to sustain. What once felt like growth slowly turned into overextension. And like many large organizations, it became dependent on a steady stream of donations that could shift overnight, especially during an economic downturn. When the 2008 financial crisis hit, everything changed. Donations dropped, costs remained high, and the gap between income and expenses began to widen at a dangerous pace. Behind the scenes, leadership struggles and internal disagreements only made things worse, creating instability at the very moment the organization needed clarity and direction. For many followers, the most painful part wasn't just the debt, it was the feeling of betrayal. Trust had been built over decades through sermons, broadcasts, and a sense of shared faith. Seeing that trust shaken by financial mismanagement left a lasting impact that couldn't be repaired overnight. In the end, the Crystal Cathedral wasn't just a building of glass. It became a symbol, a reminder that even the most powerful institutions, no matter how influential or admired, are never immune to collapse when transparency, discipline, and accountability begin to slip. To understand how a man like him was able to incur such an amount of debt, we have to go back to a time when Robert Schuller didn't have a single pane of glass, but only a rented snack bar and a vision. Long before Robert Schuller became a successful minister, he was a regular farm boy with nothing more than $500 and a dream. There was something about him that stood out. When he was 5, a minister had predicted he'd be amongst the world's best preachers, and Robert made sure to see that dream come true. When he got older, he never failed to preach everywhere he went. He couldn't afford to rent a building, but he was able to rent a snack bar at the Orange Drive-In Theater, and that was all he needed. This was his first pulpit, and he would stand up there on Sunday mornings and preach to people sitting in their station wagons and convertibles. It sounded strange because most religious leaders at the time thought a church belonged in a formal building with wooden pews and quiet hallways. But Schuller saw things differently. He realized that many people felt uncomfortable in a conventional church setting. By inviting them to stay in their cars, he made Christianity accessible to everyone. You could show up in your pajamas or bring your dog along, and nobody would judge you. This was his standout moment. He called it "Come as you are" in the family car. This simple idea immediately turned him into a local sensation almost overnight. He was reaching people who had never set foot in a church by meeting them exactly where they were. During these early years, Schuller developed his signature philosophy called possibility thinking. He was heavily influenced by Norman Vincent Peale, who wrote about the power of positive thinking. Schuller took some of those ideas and added his own sunny California twist. He stopped talking about the usual church topics like sin and hellfire. Instead, he focused on more relatable topics of self-esteem and the path to success, and with that, he instantly became a salesman of hope. This message was perfect for the post-war era in America, especially as it came at a time when people wanted to feel good about themselves and their future. They wanted to believe that anything was possible if they had enough faith and a positive attitude. His brand was built on being relatable and encouraging. Unlike the stiff, old-fashioned minister everyone was used to seeing at church, Schuller looked different from them too. And just like that, the parking lot was full every week, and the donations were growing fast. His unique approach to ministry generated a lot of money and a lot of fame in a short time, and it gave him the confidence to think even bigger. The drive-in was a success, but Schuller's dream was bigger than what the parking lot had to offer. He wanted to build something the world had never seen. The Empire of Glass. Schuller took his vision and turned it into a reality that captured the attention of the entire world. He hired a world-famous architect named Philip Johnson to design a building made almost entirely of glass. When the Crystal Cathedral finally opened in 1980, it was a literal architectural sight to behold. The building had more than 10,000 panes of silver glass held together by a white steel frame. From the look of it, the building had to cost an arm and a leg, and it really did. It was said that the cathedral cost around $18 million back then, which equals more than $60 million in today's current value. In the blink of an eye, the drive-in church had transitioned into being not only a cathedral, but also the permanent home of the Hour of Power, which grew into the most watched religious program on the planet. Schuller's voice was broadcast into living rooms in over 150 countries. Soon enough, he became a global celebrity. From the broadcast, it was obvious he had invested so much more in the production because it wasn't like any typical Sunday morning service, and people loved it. This massive reach made the ministry incredibly wealthy and influential. The pulpit saw some of the famous people from around the world. Legendary figures such as Maya Angelou or even powerful world leaders and presidents made appearances every now and then. Schuller had successfully created a space where faith and celebrity culture met right in the middle. He was no longer a preacher at a drive-in snack bar. He was the leader of a spiritual movement that seemed completely unstoppable. During these peak years, the Schuller family became the equivalent of religious royalty in Orange County. They lived in beautiful homes and traveled across the globe to meet with high-ranking officials and dignitaries. They represented the American dream wrapped in a religious package. Everything they touched during this era seemed to turn to gold. The ministry was thriving, the donations were pouring in, and those glass walls looked strong enough to last forever. But what made the Crystal Cathedral so powerful also made it incredibly fragile. The very scale that impressed millions came with enormous upkeep, maintenance costs, staffing, productions, and constant innovation to keep audiences engaged. It wasn't just a church anymore, it was a global operation that needed to function like a corporation. And with that kind of structure, even small financial missteps could quietly grow into major problems over time. There was also an unspoken pressure to keep the image alive. Success had become part of the message, and maintaining that image meant continuously operating at a high level, no matter what was happening behind the scenes. Few people saw the strained building beneath the surface. In many ways, the Empire of Glass became a perfect metaphor. From the outside, it looked flawless, reflective, and unbreakable. But inside, the pressure was mounting. And as history would later reveal, even the strongest glass can shatter when the foundation beneath it begins to weaken. For decades, the glass was unbreakable. However, in 2006, the first crack appeared, and it started with the one thing every king fears: a successor. After many years of successfully running his ministry, Robert Schuller decided it was time to take a step back. In 2006, he handed the pulpit to his only son, Robert A. Schuller, as expected. It seemed like the perfect plan to keep the dynasty alive, but things took an unexpected turn. The younger Schuller had big ideas. He looked at the massive glass cathedral and saw a ministry that needed a serious upgrade. He wanted to reach out to a younger generation of believers to help with his big plans. Most importantly, he began to look at the bank accounts. He noticed that the finances were starting to leak, and he tried to tighten the belt and change the way they spent money. This new direction did not sit well with the people already in power. The board of directors was filled with his own family members who were used to the old ways. His father still had a massive presence and found it difficult to watch someone else change his life's work. The tension inside those glass walls became heavy, and soon it was way past ministerial duties. It became a tug of war about who really held the power in the family business. The disagreements grew louder, and the distance between father and son soon became a public spectacle. What was supposed to be a seamless passing of the torch became a match that lit the entire house on fire. War in the Cathedral. In a move that left the congregation and television viewers completely stunned, Robert Schuller Sr. announced that his son was being removed from the Hour of Power broadcast. Not only was the announcement shocking, but it also signaled the start of a brutal war within the family. The official reason given to the public was a lack of shared vision. While the public statement sounded professional, the private reality was much more intense. The younger Schuller wanted to make changes to how the church was run and who appeared on the show. He wanted to look into the mounting bills and fix the cracks in the foundation. However, his father and sisters were not ready to let go of the way things had always been done. Publicly firing his son had immediate consequences. Loyal donors who had supported the ministry for years were heartbroken. They had grown to love the son and felt he was being treated unfairly by his own flesh and blood. When they saw the heir to the ministry get pushed out, they decided to take their money elsewhere. The mailbags that used to be stuffed with checks began to arrive half empty. As the donations dried up, the leadership at the cathedral became even more desperate. The family members who remained were left to pick up the pieces, yet the damage was already done. The atmosphere in the cathedral was toxic, and the bank accounts were draining faster than ever before. With the son gone, his sisters and brothers-in-law moved in to fill the power vacuum. But they weren't just inheriting a ministry, they were inheriting a ticking financial time bomb. With Robert Schuller Jr. out of the picture and his father now running things started to get back on track, but not entirely. In order to do that, Schuller wanted one last monument to his career, which he called the International Center for Possibility Thinking. Little did they know, this would be the start of their doom. This project was a $20 million office and hospitality building that the ministry did not actually need since they already had the beautiful glass cathedral nearby. This new center stood as more of a vanity project than a functional necessity. It drained the cash reserves the church should have kept for an actual crisis. Instead of saving, they spent every penny on shiny new surfaces and expensive new designs. The timing of this project could not have been worse. As the ribbon was being cut on this new building, the 2008 Great Recession hit the United States. Southern California was at the very center of the housing market crash. People who had sent checks every month for years suddenly lost their jobs or their homes. They could no longer afford to support the Schuller dream, and this left the ministry with huge mortgage payments and very little income coming through the doors. Soon, the debt became impossible to manage. It was so bad that the interest payments alone were eating the ministry alive every single month. While the organization was sinking, the lifestyle of the inner circle stayed the same, and this was what frustrated the public. Even though the ministry was millions of dollars in the hole, the Schuller family continued to live large. There were records of expensive car services and first-class international travel. Family members were still receiving large salaries along with housing allowances from the church funds. It was a confusing situation where the organization was completely drowning in debt, while the people at the top were acting wealthy. They were living on borrowed time and the patience of small businesses that were not getting paid for their work. Local businesses that worked for the church eventually grew tired of waiting, was finally being tested by the harsh reality of the economy. The church owed millions, and as the 2010 deadline approached, the creditors stopped waiting for miracles and started asking for the keys. The October meltdown. In October 2010, the Crystal Cathedral Ministries officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. It was no longer a private family struggle. The public now finally saw the receipts of the ministry's $43 million debt. This number was a punch to the gut for the thousands of regular people who had sent in their small donations for years. It turned out the ministry was not only struggling, it was completely underwater. The list of people waiting for their money was long. These were people who had trusted the ministry of hope to do the right thing. Yet they were left holding empty pockets while the church leadership stayed in their positions. But that was only the beginning of the public backlash. While everyone was trying to make sense of the incurred debts, a single email sent to the congregation left people speechless. This email contained a message asking church members to volunteer to cook and deliver meals to the Schuller family members. This request arrived at a time when records showed the family was still drawing hundreds of thousands of dollars in salaries and housing benefits. To the average person struggling through a recession, this felt incredibly insulting. The backlash was swift and glaring. People were no longer looking at the Schullers as spiritual leaders. They now saw the family as out of touch and entitled. The filing was supposed to be a means to help the church survive and get back on its feet. Instead, it became a giant spotlight on every financial mistake made over the last decade. The transparency of the glass building was now working against them. Every legal document revealed more spending and more mismanagement. The bankruptcy claim that was meant to save the church now exposed every dirty secret hidden behind those 10,000 windows. The court eventually decided that the only way to satisfy the creditors was to put the entire campus up for sale, which started a massive bidding war. Chapman University made a strong play for the land, yet in the end, the Roman Catholic Diocese of Orange won with a bid of $57.5 million. A building designed to be the face of a modern Protestant movement suddenly became a Catholic cathedral. For Robert Schuller Sr., the sale was a crushing emotional weight. Watching a judge sign away his glass masterpiece was gut-wrenching. The transition was quick as the new owners began removing the Schuller brand from every corner of the property. The name on the sign changed to Christ Cathedral, and the ministry that once reached millions was suddenly a guest in its own home. The massive pipe organ and the glass walls stayed, yet the identity of the place was gone forever. Even after the sale, the internal war did not stop. The family continued to battle over what was left of the ministry's assets and intellectual property. It was a sad ending for a place that was once a symbol of possibility. The building was gone, but the Schullers were still there, clinging to the last remnants of their influence. But in 2012, the final axe fell. The final purge. 2 years after the Schuller family had lost their church, the situation turned from a financial crisis into a legal nightmare. In a move that shocked even their most loyal followers, Robert Schuller and his family filed a lawsuit against their own bankrupt ministry. They were fighting for money they claimed was owed to them for back pay and the use of their intellectual property. This legal battle made it clear that the connection between the family and the mission was officially severed. The focus was no longer on spreading hope. It was about who would walk away with the last few $100s in the bank. The board of directors finally reached a breaking point. They realized the ministry could never move forward as long as the Schuller name was still attached to the leadership. In a series of tense meetings, the board moved to terminate the remaining family members. Even the founder himself was pushed out. By March 2012, the purge was complete. Not a single member of the Schuller family held a position at the Crystal Cathedral anymore. The silence that followed was noticeable. The man who had once stood before millions was suddenly an outsider at the very place he created. He was no longer the voice of the hour of power or the face of the glass sanctuary. Robert Schuller went from the world's most famous preacher to a man banned from his own pulpit. Robert Schuller spent his final years far from the cameras and the cheering crowds. In 2015, the man who once commanded the attention of millions passed away at age 88 after a 2-year battle with esophageal cancer. By the time he was laid to rest, his name had largely faded from the headlines. The empire was gone, and the family name no longer carried the same weight in the world of television ministry. Today, the Schuller legacy exists in smaller fragments. His grandson, Bobby Schuller, leads a separate ministry that continues the Hour of Power broadcast, but it operates on a much smaller scale than the original. The massive Crystal Cathedral itself is now a Catholic place of worship, stripped of the Schuller branding and the high-stakes family drama. With the Schuller family name now buried amongst other fallen iconic figures, it leaves us with a burning question. Was it the $43 million debt that killed the church, or the broken family behind it? Because in the end, stories like this are rarely about just numbers on a page. They're about leadership, trust, and the quiet decisions made behind closed doors that slowly shape the future. What looks like a sudden scoot is often years in the making, and when everything finally unravels, it leaves behind more than financial loss. It leaves behind questions, lessons, and a legacy that people will keep debating for years to come. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss any of our videos. Thanks for watching.